Welcome to the week ahead. We're looking at the third week of July 2022. If you've been following a particular Twitter handle, which is called 2022 Progress, you're going to see that we have crossed the 55% progress of this year. Siapa tak sangka kan? We've been over the 50% mark. Anyway, my name is Ibrahim Sani and this show shall explore some of the items that will take place over the next 7 days. We're broadcasting from our main studio here in the All Asia Broadcasting Centre in Bukit Jalil, and over the next half an hour we'll be discussing some of the items that will be impacting you for the time being. We start off with our first story, the big story at least, which is called the anti-hopping bill that we've seen for quite a bit. The anti-hopping bill will be tabled in the Parliament on Monday. This has been confirmed by the Law Minister, Datuk Seri Dr. Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, confirming that the second reading of the draft bill will be tabled at the Parliament, and of course we're targeting that to be tabled when the Parliament sitting opens. Of course, Datuk Seri Wan Junaidi did say that this is at the discretion of the Speaker of the House in order to allow for the anti-hopping bill to be seen as to be having their second read. The Special Select Committee has been set up to review the bill, and of course some amendments have been made towards from the first reading, and of course we're seeing the amendments seen on the second reading. The aim, of course, is to stop MPs from hopping about. So we also want to see the impact into how this is going to see the reaction towards some MPs that have been hopping following the 14th general election, and they have not been openly opposing the anti-hopping bill, but surely they have not been supporting it either. It is worth to note that a few months ago on Agenda AWANI, I spoke with three lawmakers, namely the Seremban MP from DAP, Anthony Loke, the Lembah Pantai MP, Fahmi Fadzil, as well as the Pengerang MP, Azalina, and they all represent different factions of the party and different cohorts within the segment, and they do say unanimously that they agree that the anti-hopping bill must be tabled, must be passed without exception. And of course, the Prime Minister have said that he registers no objections. So, quite literally, there is nothing stopping the Parliament from proposing the bill, reading the bill, debating the bill, and eventually passing the bill. The issue here is on the willpower of some of the cabinet ministers that is putting a stop to this. That's going to be seen next week. Now we're going to see our second story, of course, so still on the law. This is the much awaited Tobacco and Smoking Control Bill. Now this has been approved by the cabinet last week, in fact last Wednesday. The Health Minister, YB Khairi Jamaluddin, said that the bill will be presented in the next parliamentary sitting, and the idea here is to create that generational endgame proposal, so-called. And of course, this is with the aim of banning those born after the year 2005 from being able to buy tobacco products and to buy vaping products, with the process of stopping young Malaysians from picking up this nasty habit that has resulted in countless deaths from the non-communicable diseases like mouth cancer, throat cancer, and of course, lung cancer. The Tobacco and Smoking Control Bill is, in a lot of ways, just like the anti-hopping bill, in a way that no one has opposed it, no MP has said no to it, and therefore there is no restrictions and no objections towards how this bill is going to be presented, read, debated, and eventually passed. So we're going to see two bills, hopefully, will be passed in the parliamentary sitting. These are some of the ideas that will take place regarding the law aspect for next week. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more on what's coming up on the week ahead. Welcome back. This is the week ahead. Now we're looking at some economic news that will take place over the next 7 days, one of which is, of course, the external trade data. The Department of Statistics Malaysia, or DOSM, is set to release the external trade data for June. Exports increased 30.5% year-on-year to 120 billion ringgit from May. Total trade rising 33.6% to 228 billion from a year ago. And of course, we're looking at not just the external trade data for Malaysia per se, but how Malaysia is tying up with the big traditional partners of ours, for instance, with China, the US, and of course, Singapore. Trade external towards Singapore, of course, is going to be impacted. Items like chicken and other poultry products have suffered a ban. Items like electronic products have also seen restrictions towards Singapore. My suspicion is external trade data for June for that market between Malaysia and Singapore is going to take a hit and suffer. On top of that, we're looking at some other economic data that is going to take place, one of which is, of course, the Global Central Bank's monetary policy meeting. They will continue to dominate next week's economic calendar. We're looking at the European Central Bank, widely expected to hike 25 basis points this week. But according to some analysts, 50 bips rise is also on the table. And of course, with the euro at a 20-year low against the dollar, in fact, last week we saw it parity 1-to-1, i.e. 1 euro is $1. The hawkish mood is still standing up to the test. And of course, they're looking at a weak-looking survey indicator. Flash PMI, or Purchasing Managers Index data for the Eurozone, will follow on Friday next week. And of course, this is an indication of some of the cooling price pressures that is going to take place, that has taken place in June. Also, Bank of Japan, BOJ, is also set to see its weak currency in focus. And of course, Japanese policymaker has stressed that the priority is to support the economy if necessary. The PMI strengthened in June in Japan. Flash figures will be eagerly awaited to see the impact then. Finally, we look at China because the PBOC, or the People's Bank of China's meeting on Wednesday, will yield after China left its key policy rate unchanged in May. The world's second largest economy saw its gross domestic product contract 2.6%. quarter on quarter. And of course, much of this is going to rely on how the central party is going to move ahead in terms of solidifying their movement there. That is much of the trade data. Next, our next story is, of course, the Consumer Price Index. Again, DOSM will be expected to release the Consumer Price Index for June. The release will be expected to happen on Friday. To recap, May's CPI, or Consumer Price Index, expanded 2.8% year-on-year on the back of a 5.2% rise in food prices. Do go to astroawani.com and check out some of the interviews that we have done, particularly with folks like from CGS CIMB, where I speak to the head of economics there to ask why some of the products like chicken has risen, based on the market price more than double digits. And we want to see how the 5.2% rise in food prices is going to take place. Not just that, we've seen how other price segments, like for cars and holidays, are all rising as well. This is going to impact the general idea of the Consumer Price Index moving forward. We also have to expect the Consumer Price Index to be impacted following the constriction of the economy, considering that the Bank Negara has raised the basis, the OPR, or overnight policy rate, by 50 bips over the past few months. Now, we look at some of the items following the Bank Negara Malaysia's International Reserve. As of July 15th, they will be released as well next week. And as at June 30th, to recap, the international reserves for Malaysia amounted to 109 billion US dollars, or about 485 billion ringgit, from $109 billion in June 15th. Okay, we'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more on what's next on the week ahead. Welcome back. This is the week ahead. There are three more stories that I want to go through with you about the items that will take place over the next week. Now, the big news that came out from last week is, of course, Indonesia, because they have said last week on Wednesday, July 13th, that they have temporarily stopped sending its citizens to work in Malaysia, including thousands recruited for the plantation sector. They cite that this is because there is a breach in a worker recruitment deal signed between Malaysia and Indonesia. The freeze is the latest blow for our country. We are the world's second largest palm oil producer, and we are a key link in the global supply chain when it comes to palm oil. And already we've seen this sector facing a shortage of some 1.2 million workers that will derail its economic recovery. Indonesia's ambassador to Malaysia, His Excellency Hermono, told Reuters that the freeze was imposed after Malaysia's immigration authorities continued using an online recruitment system for domestic workers that has been linked to allegations of trafficking and forced labor. The system's continued operation violated the terms of an agreement signed between our two countries in April this year. This is, of course, aimed at improving the protection of domestic workers employed in Malaysian households. Now, Malaysia's Human Resource Minister, Datuk Seri M. Saravanan, confirmed that they have received the letter from the Indonesian counterparts informing our country of that country's freeze. Now, of course, the Human Resource Minister told Reuters that he would discuss the matter with the Ministry of Home Affairs, which oversees the immigration items. Malaysian companies have submitted around 20,000 applications for workers, about half of which were for jobs in the plantation and manufacturing sectors. And this will definitely derail our conversation on how we look at these kind of items moving forward. It is worth noting, that this is an ongoing conversation. We've seen how this has impacted the previous talking points of domestic workers, or so to speak, housemaids, and we want to see how this is going to impact the other construction workers back inside. And of course, we also want to understand a little bit better about some of the progress that has been taking place on this topic, of which my colleagues, Nina Rosman, Najib Aruf, as well as Harith Ashraf Hasnan over at Niaga Awani, our sister show to this, talk at length about some of the analysts that were touching on this item. You can go to astroawani.com, look for Niaga Awani, or look for Indonesian workers. Lots of topics on this conversation. So how will this move forward? Following this ban, we don't know whether or not this is going to be impacted in the long term, but for the short term, definitely we're going to see a lot of issues. Malaysia does rely on millions of foreign workers, mainly, not just from Indonesia, but from Bangladesh and Nepal, to fill our factories and to fill our plantation jobs where our locals are not taking it up. But despite lifting a pandemic freeze on recruitment in February, Malaysia has not seen a significant return on workers amid slow government approvals and protracted talks with source countries over employee protections. In my own interview on Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani, I spoke with the developer of the Bukit Jalil Health Center, Health Wellness City, and he says that the entire city development here in Bukit Jalil, next to our studio, to be told the truth, he can't start the construction process because there are no construction workers to work with. So that is a big problem for the development of our country when our own construction sites are no longer operational or is slow to be operational because there are no construction workers. There will be no developments if we do not have construction workers, as simple as that. So he didn't want to argue on it, but I take it that the conversation was also involved on how the government has been slow in terms of giving the approval to import foreign workers coming in. That's a big problem there. Now, there have been growing concerns in recent years over the treatment of migrant workers, and of course, 7 Malaysian companies banned by the US in the last 2 years over what they describe it as forced labor. So this week, lots of conversations on this. So do keep an eye out on that. Okay, next two last stories. We want to take a look into the elements of UMNO, yeah? Because the political observers will keenly follow the Registrar of Societies, ROS, as it makes its decision on UMNO's application to amend the party's constitution. After much delay, the anticipated decision will only be known very soon. Gan Ping Siu from the Centre for a Better Tomorrow explains that the consequences of this delay and how this could impact the political instability that is plaguing the nation.
Main political actor in the country, we can't afford to have such a big political actor. Its legality is in question or in limbo. What's more, we know Prime Minister is coming from this party, and our nations are also, we pride ourselves to be a nation which is fairly matured in our legal framework and in regulating all sectors and industries. So with such an important decision, keep in limbo, keep in abeyance. We are very worried that this is going to create political chaos or instability. Let's say the decision is made subsequently in the month of September or October, and then legal challenges coming in and all that. This is going to what kind of messages we are trying to send to our own citizens and to the foreigners or the foreign investors, and to have confidence in our country, especially post-COVID, the recovery process.
Therefore, Ping Siu suggests for the ROS to be reinvented and parked independently without any attachment to a ministry.
We have more than 115,000 bodies registered with ROS. Of which, of course, quite a numbers are for political parties. But we must understand also, political parties, they belong to different kettle of fish. Yeah, when you put them together, the regulatory framework, to put them together with temples, clans associations, or NGOs, civil society, and you make the ROS function far too comprehensive, let's put it this way, okay, to put it nicely, far too comprehensive, too many duties to address to, and of different sectors and industries. So, and it always occurs, it always gives us an impression that the ROS of the day it has to be courteous and accountable to its immediate political master, which is a Home Minister. Whether he's independent or not independent, by being placed under the Home Ministry, that in itself open up a big questions, giving especially our ecosystem, our political ecosystem, Malaysia.
So considering that the Parliament is going to be debating some stuff, and of course considering that UMNO is still looking at the ROS as an issue, we're going to see some conversations from the political side coming in on the legitimacy of UMNO outright, and it's important to keep your ears on the ground in terms of the developments of the conversation. We've seen how our Prime Minister, Ismail Sabri, is also doing a lot of maneuvering in terms of managing the various expectations and various sections within UMNO. We've also seen how our former Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak, was also talking about how he could move into the political sphere despite the avalanche of court cases that he is facing. And finally, we've seen how the former MB of Negeri Sembilan, Tok Mat, was talking about the item of why Najib must go to prison and how he is planning to forge his own movements inside his own party. So a lot of things going on there. And I'm pretty sure all this is actually important to be resolved very soon because, quite frankly, GE15 is just around the corner. A lot of things to be debated there. So we move on to our final story, which is, of course, the Finance Ministers of G20. They met in Bali last week in Indonesia, and they discussed at length about the Russian-Ukraine conflict that has been overshadowing the summit. The G20 Finance Ministers did argue whether the common ground can be reached soon to resolve the crisis. And while we have seen a lot of postulations into the conversations coming out from the G20 finance ministers. And as at this point right now, I'm pretty sure everyone has gone back to their home country or moved on to other things. Some items do remain sticking out. And because of this, we speak with Dr. Zohri Idris from the Policy of Economic Affairs Centre here in Malaysia, it's called the Policy and Economic Affairs Centre of Malaysia Foundation. That's the organization that he represents, or called PEACE. He shares his thoughts on the matter.
It is hard and difficult to construct a common denominator of all leaders, because we are seeing that countries have different approaches and takes when it comes to the conflict. But what we should actually appreciate is how Indonesia actually sets the right tone to the G20 Finance Ministers meeting today. Now, Indonesia sees itself as a bridge in working together with both Russia and Ukraine, in the moment where no other countries, blocks, or regional organization who wants to engage these two countries objectively. So it is important to support Indonesia's objective approach on how to meddle these two countries, because we could not deny the fact that we have to bring everyone onto the table of discussion, and Indonesia sees that as a potential to solve the problem.
He says other ASEAN nations must learn from Indonesia's multilateralism approach as a way forward to solving the crisis in Ukraine.
Indonesia does not play the blaming game, does not play the calling up names, and isolating people. But Indonesia is playing that working together objectively with the parties concerned in this conflict. And I think this is the way of ASEAN way, or the Asian way of moving forward towards this crisis. We do not isolate, we do not sanction and embargo, but we are actually working together in having finding the right discussions. So I think Indonesia speaks not only the voices of ASEAN, but I think it's also clearly that they speak the voices of the low-income countries and the developing and the least developing countries who need solutions.
Yep, so that's it. That's all that we have for you on the week ahead. Do tweet to me at Ibrahim Saninet if you want to share with me some of your ideas on what should be included in the show. I will, of course, read each and every single one of your tweets and, of course, all your DMs, so that I, too, can respond to some of the ideas that you have been sharing with me. But until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye. My only mission right now is for you to have a great week ahead.